thanking the president or complimenting him on his world leadership publicly at the G7 that is, in fact, elbows down.
Industry Minister Melanie Joly was on with Vashi Kapela's question period, and she was confronted by Vashi on how the Liberal Party was talking very tough against the United States, against Donald Trump. And that seems to have all gone away ever since they got elected. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. Of course, many of us knew that the Liberal Party was going to have zero impact against the Donald Trump tariffs and the actions, and that the real issue, of course, was less about trade that the Liberal Party keeps talking about and how they don't do any industry inside of Canada, and they're not going to be doing any industry inside of Canada because they want to shut down everything that touches carbon. They basically want to try and make it so that only 3 or 4 things in this country work, and they want you to believe all the while the economy is crashing, that somehow they're going to be doing something about it any day now, 30 more days, another month, another 6 months. You know, it's always around the corner with these guys. It's never here now. It's always sometime later. And then when later gets here, they try to find some excuse to blame it on somebody else. Like, you won't believe who Melanie Joly is trying to pass the responsibility on to in this interview. It is shocking, the things that come out of her mouth, and to think that nobody in her base, nobody in her riding, nobody holds her accountable to this kind of thinking, this kind of action, this kind of behavior. Like, that's a sad testament to the people that voted for her.
The steel industry in particular, already hurting, says that what you're doing, what you've just announced this week, falls short. Why are you not levying equivalent counter tariffs on the American steel industry?
And that's why we wanted to make sure that we were protecting our domestic market against countries that are not following the trade rules. And we won't accept any form of dumping in Canada. So that's why we came up with really important measures. That's why the government is really in solution mode, and we're working, and this morning I was still talking to different steel CEOs to make sure that we're able to keep the steel plants working.
A couple things that I've noticed, they've narrowed their focus, right? First, it was going to stop all of the tariffs ever. Then they were going to save the car industry, all of the tariffs. Now it's just steel and aluminum. They've narrowed their focus to these 2 industries. Of course, those are the 2 industries that Donald Trump come out of the gate talking about, was the steel and the aluminum. One of the biggest issues that he has with Canada giving the American steel is that it's not buying American steel, steel made in the USA. Now, her response is to say, well, we're going to do exactly what Donald Trump is doing. We're going to make sure that nobody's putting cheaper steel into our country. Of course, that's going to be all the steel on earth, because Canada has the most expensive manufactured steel in the entire world. And it's so expensive that when the government subsidizes them, the Americans can go to the trade board, just like they do with the softwood lumber, and they can say, hey, this is subsidized and we don't want it in here. That's why they can't do anything about it. That's why they talk about unjustified, but they really have no court case, nothing of that nature, because the Canadian government said, switch over to this expensive steel manufacturing and we will pay you tax breaks. We will give you a break. That's the kind of thing that allows for you to make a lot of it, because the government is subsidizing it. The taxpayer is paying for it. Then you can sell it down into other markets less than the market itself, because it's actually being subsidized by the government. And so from the United States perspective, it looks like Canada is dumping steel. So of course the Liberal Party knows that. They just don't hope that you don't know it. But I understand it. I see what's going on. That's why we don't see them taking the Americans to court. And Trump is very aware of what's happening inside of the CUSMA deal, and so anything inside of there, it's okay. Once that deal is expired, though, once that happens, there's going to be no holding back the idea that all of these products are going to have tariffs, as well as the action of the car dealers to move most of their manufacturing south of the border so that they can avoid also the tariffs. So we hear the Liberal government talking about steel and aluminum. We hear them trying to tell you that at first they were going to stop all of the tariffs. They were going to put Donald Trump in the spot. Mark Carney said he's the only guy of the people running for prime minister that has the experience, that has the know-it-all, that knows all of these things that you heard. You'll remember. Now, when I see him dealing with Donald Trump, which is only 2 times, he gushes like a schoolboy. He gushes like a fanboy. He tells Donald Trump that everything is warm and fuzzy. And it's embarrassing, first of all. And of course, it's not the talk that he had on the campaign trail when he was telling the world that he was going to be very tough with Donald Trump. Now Donald Trump comes to Kananaskis and he's like, oh, look, here, please meet my wife. And Vashi very correctly pointed that out. And Joly, on top of everything else, tried to say that it was all about how he was being diplomatic because he's the leader of he's the chair of the G7 this time around. But he didn't do that to any of the other leaders. He didn't turn to the lady from Italy and say, oh, your leadership, or turn to, like, he didn't do it. He only did that for Trump. And you would think that Trump would be the last person he does it for, because if you'll think back to the campaign of the Liberal Party, everything was all about Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad. Turns out that he admires Trump. Turns out that he thinks Trump is the greatest thing since sliced bread, apparently, because the way he talks to him, the way he gushes, it's written all over his face. I mean, it's not hard to figure out.
They describe a situation that exists at the moment in the short term as being completely shut out of the U.S. market.
Yeah.
And they think, based on the conversations they had with you and your colleagues, they had thought that some sort of more amplified response would be coming sooner. They are not happy that they have to wait another 30 days.
Well, I wouldn't say they're not happy right now. I think that
They literally said it falls short.
well, they said that short term, we need to make sure that we close the market. And the question is how we make sure that we protect the market. And that's why I'm saying the discussions are quite constructive right now, because it's not the why, it's really the how we do it. Then the question is middle term. How do we bridge them to make sure that they can keep their employees, and we can make sure that Canadians working in the steel sector know that they will have a job not only for this summer but for the next years, and their kids can work at the plant as well. So we're working and negotiating right now with some plants, some companies, to offer liquidities.
Wow, what a change of position. First, she was talking tough about how they were going to stop the Americans from being unjust and blah, blah, blah. Now they're going to make sure that they pass rules that don't allow anybody else to dump steel into the market, because they're hoping that they can negotiate with 2 or 3 of these mills. Just a couple, not all of them. You heard her. I would imagine a couple of them are going to be in Quebec, and I would imagine there's that one in Hamilton. After that, they're going to try to take these 3 or 4 little mills and supply the entire country, which is never going to happen. But there's nothing else they can do, because the American market is shut off. You heard her, that they are basically shut out of the American market. And they are shut out of the American market because the Canadian government is keeping them liquid. The Canadian government is giving them bridge loans, which is a loan that keeps you liquid, which then to the Americans, they can go to the trade board and they can say, no, this steel is subsidized by the government. And by doing that, they're bringing it into our market for less money. Just exactly the same thing you hear the Canadians say about the Chinese steel. And the Americans said it about the Chinese steel, because that's what it is. Melanie Joly is bailing out these few very specific, massive organizations without really saying the word bailout. They're just going to switch it over to the word liquid. It's the same thing. This is just the lockdown all over again. Instead of giving millions of dollars to Walmart and millions of dollars to any other store that was trying to stay open, they're giving millions and billions of dollars to the steel industry, whether it be Dofasco or any of the other ones. Your money. That's one of the reasons why they didn't want to tell anybody what the budget was going to be, because they knew that most of it was going to be given out as handouts to corporate welfare, which Pierre Poilievre told you he wasn't going to do, and then they would have had to sink or swim, which is really what has to happen. That's the only way to reset the market inside of Canada, because if you tell them they're going to sink or swim, I assure you they will find somebody to buy it inside of this country. And interprovincial corridors, blah, blah, blah. The only thing that would have to happen is the federal government would need to get out of the way. Less regulation, they call that. Of course, Melanie Joly's double talk is not having any impact on Vashi Capella. She sees right through it. She's a sharp lady, and she understands the words that are being used just as well as I do.
Like, are you going to claim a win if we have 25% tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel?
Listen, Vashi, we've always said that these tariffs were unjustifiable, that they were illegal. There was also even a decision from some important courts by the justice system in the U.S. saying that tariffs were unconstitutional. So we're following that. closely, as of course we will let the the justice system in the U.S. decide over that.
Obviously, there's no truth to what you just had to say. There was a court case, and they tried to have the tariffs overturned, but that's not people who are being serious about having things brought in from Canada. That's people trying to get things brought in from China or maybe Mexico. Mostly, though, it was a bunch of governors that were trying to punish Trump for being a Republican. Right now that they've loaded all of their courts with the far left judges, they feel like they could win. Of course, they got what they wanted in the lower court, then it went to a court of appeal, and it was immediately overturned. I think it took about 90 minutes to have the thing overturned. I suppose at that point, the opposition has the opportunity, like the Democratic governors have the opportunity to appeal as well. However, once you begin to do that process, you can see that it takes a little bit longer the higher up the chain you go. Further, with every passing minute, the popularity of these plans, the ideas of having a job, and all of the rest of it are increasing exponentially. I think the popularity, according to the most recent poll that I saw, is the Democratic Party's at like 13%. They have no men that are under the age of 50, and they have very few that are over the age of 50. So the idea that they're somehow going to be able to continue to stop Donald Trump moves further and further from the line every day. Donald Trump is surrounded by lawyers. He knows what he's allowed and not allowed to do. The man's been in business his entire life, and not like Mark Carney, where he's just a corporate raider. This is a guy who's gone, he's done the groundwork. He remembers what it's like to ask Ireland for a code to get things done, like a building code. And he remembers what it's like. Long before he had people to do that, it was just him, maybe the wife, that kind of thing, a little office in his apartment, in his house. So you're not going to get the guy to slip up that way. But of course, Melanie Joly's not going to tell you that. She's just going to use innuendo to try to make you think that the courts are somehow going to stop Donald Trump. It's always something, because the liberal government doesn't have an idea what to do. They don't have a single clue. Now they're caught between this ideological slant where they can't do anything inside of this country that might bend a blade of grass, and they were relying heavily on always being able to cash in on the American market. The American market is now closed, and they have no idea what to do. And I say that not because it's not obvious to the regular listeners of the Canadian Shield, but because people who are just popping in and voted for, Mark Carney or voted against Donald Trump need to realize that you were tricked, you were duped, and you have to think your way through your vote. Because at the rate that we're going, the economic collapse is going to bring a new election rather quickly. And you can't think in your mind that being broke is somehow going to hurt Donald Trump.
Your opposition contends right now that the opposite is true, that essentially by putting off, for example, levying counter tariffs, by the prime minister's display thanking the president or complimenting him on his world leadership publicly at the G7, that is in fact elbows down, counter to the elbows up message you campaigned on. How do you reconcile those things?
What is fascinating when you look at the last parliamentary session, we've just finished on Friday, is that there was nearly no question by the opposition regarding our relationship with the U.S. The vast majority of the questions were not linked to it. Actually, when thinking of looking at how we can support the auto sector, they were not even referring to the trade war, much more on EV mandates, which we're working on. So what is fascinating by the opposition is when thinking of what they could have done themselves is I think they would have capitulated. I think that they would clearly have cozied up to the White House.
But that's what your government is doing right now.
All I can say is you cannot be serious. You campaign on being the only ones who can solve the problem with Donald Trump. Now here we are months later, nothing has happened. You're stalling, traveling around the world on taxpayers' dollars, getting nothing done. Situations and conditions inside of Canada are getting worse. You're not able to solve those problems either. the conservative government didn't attack you over your lack of ability to move the ball with Donald Trump, to address the issues with Donald Trump, to essentially do what you said you were going to do. And so in your mind, rather than say, well, we have a real problem here and we don't know what we're doing, you're saying, well, they didn't ask us about it because they probably would be in the same position and they would have cozied up to Donald Trump. There's so many things wrong with what you just had to say that I don't even really know where to begin. I'll say this though. Wow. What an absurd level of mental gymnastics that you had to twist your mind into to sort of shove that thesis down our throats. Unbelievable. It's the conservatives' fault now? That's what you're going with? That's where you land? That's what you have? We are again back to this. So for the last 2 weeks, all I've heard from the Liberal Party is how the conservatives need to get behind you. Then they don't get in front of you over the Donald Trump, so essentially getting behind you. And you say they're behind you because they probably would have done the same thing. It's ridiculous. I mean, that is, wow, staggering in my mind to think that you actually said that on national television and expect people to agree with you. I don't agree with you. I think that you made promises that you couldn't keep. I think that people that voted for you are feeling very ripped off, and I don't blame them. You did not accomplish what you said you would do. You are not even close to trying to solving these problems. And even if you were to solve them tomorrow, the ripples of the economic damage are going to take at least 2 years to recover from. Of course, I will remind everybody the primary differences between Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney's campaign. Pierre Poilievre said he was going to work through the summer. Pierre Poilievre said he was going to get regulations out of the way, not draft more regulations in the bill of C5 and try to convince everybody that by giving veto power to the minister or veto power to the prime minister, they're going to improve the situations on the ground. They were going to open up the taps on the product that we have in Alberta, in the products that we have in Saskatchewan and Manitoba that would go light years towards solving this problem. The same products that the Liberal government is refusing to touch. So they didn't talk to you about it. Doesn't mean that that's because they were worried about what Donald Trump was going to say. Pierre Poilievre said simply, I'm going to increase the tariffs, which I don't necessarily agree with, but that's what he said. That's the argument here. And then he said, I'm going to get the regulations out of the way and put shovels in the ground. He was going to be worrying about domestically. Because for those of you that may not be aware, that's the only way we can solve this problem. We cannot borrow our way out of it. We cannot bail our companies out of our way out of it. And we certainly cannot improve the situation through trade. Which is why when you see Donald Trump, he's talking about bringing industry into the country. Tariffs might impact the other countries that are trading, but he's saying, no, this is what's happening inside of my country, which is exactly what we have to do in this country. As for Melanie Joly, twisting her little brain around to try to say, oh no, well, the only reason that we know for sure that they would have done the same thing is because, well, we're guessing by the way that they didn't talk to us about it, even though we just spent 2 weeks telling the Canadian population that the Liberals, the Conservatives have to get on side with our ideas. For the most part, except for that the ridiculous EV mandate, they got on side. They didn't try to get in the way of C5. And now, because of that, you're saying, oh, well, that's because they also would have had these problems with Donald Trump. We'll never know. What we do know is that the Liberal Party campaigned on solving this problem. And they have not done that. And when we see Mark Carney coming face to face with Donald Trump, what we see is a man holding his water. What we see is a man smiling from ear to ear. What we see is a fanboy. We don't see Mr. Tough as elbows up, nails, and I'm the only one who can negotiate. I mean, we're all watching. We all want to know what's happening. Ridiculous. Like the idea that she said that and is not ashamed of herself makes me question whoever voted for her. like, wow, what were you doing casting your vote for this person?
That's what your government is doing right now. The
Not
Prime Minister
at
is
all.
literally thanking the President for his world leadership at a time when the President has abandoned the U.S.'s position as a world leader.
No, I think that
That's not elbows up.
I think that President, meanwhile, while the Prime Minister was in Kananaskis, I was in Paris at the Paris Air Show, where I saw that more than ever, countries want to do business with Canada.
So if I understand you correctly, you had the leaders of the G7 plus India plus Ukraine in Alberta, of the country where you are the industry minister, trying to, revitalize the industry. Here you had the leaders of the top 7 wealthiest countries, the EU Commission, India, Ukraine. And your solution is not to go there with your prime minister and have a look and try to rub shoulders with the different people that might have been accompanying the people from the G7, the collection, the 7, in theory, 7 wealthiest countries on earth. No. You flew to France on a private jet provided to you by the Canadian people and visited an air show and came back with, well, I think people are interested in doing business with Canada. Didn't come back with any contracts, or you would have been screaming that. So here you had the 7 wealthiest countries, the leaders of it, and all of their support staff, with a couple of other ancillary countries. India is, say whatever you want, but they are doing their best to become, capitalized. Capitalism has been embraced fully. And this lady, well, she went to France. I mean, obviously, right? Why would you stay in the country that is the one that's relying on you? Why would you stay in the country that has all of these leaders coming with all of their trillion, billions of dollars that they have collectively available for all of the various industries that they might be looking at? And rather than building a connection with them. I mean, why would you need to do that? It's much better to go to an air show in France and watch a bunch of, what's the French jet fighter, the Mirage, I think, fly around. Staggering. I say again, who votes for these people? And just as I'm leaving, I hear Donald Trump, never say never. Because if this is the lady who's in charge of trying to revitalize and rescue the situation, clearly she is not capable. I'm not sure that any of the Liberal Party is capable. They certainly don't seem competent. They seem really good. The only competency they seem to possess is the ability to stall and make up stories and pretend like everything is fine, even though it's really not. That's just my opinion. You can let me know what your opinion is down in the comments. I would encourage you all to like and subscribe to this video. Share it with all of your socials. I'm going to wrap here. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.